I'm joined today by Kyle Rosenkrans, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Children's Foundation. Kyle, thanks for taking time to talk to me.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
There's a very important survey that is coming out that outlines a lot of important data about parents and children's experience during remote learning and during the COVID pandemic. And I want to unpack some of that with you. First and foremost, tell me about the survey and the broad strokes of what it's telling us.
So we conducted a survey with the Global Strategy Group firm, a pretty world-renowned polling firm, to get our hands on how parents are feeling in this period of a lot of remote learning in every part of the state. We asked them a variety of questions about how their learning experience has been, how their children have been doing in school during this incredible period of change. And what we found was pretty interesting, Brian. We found tremendous disparities in attitudes and tremendous gaps in opportunity, gaps in needed services that fell hardest on low-income parents of color. And we think that means there's a lot more the state can be doing. There's a lot more that we collectively in schools can be doing to support those families.
I think one of the most important points here is that parents responded favorably to how municipalities and schools were handling education here at the end of 2020. But conversely, there's a very clear racial and income disparity that's baked into the remote learning experience. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so we asked parents how they felt about the educational response to COVID a full month or two into the school year. And we asked them about how they felt about literally every layer of government they interact with, from their child's classroom teacher all the way up to the governor. And in between, you have local superintendents, boards of education, the state legislature, on up. And yes, the answer that came back was very favorable. We found that parents were very generous towards government and their local schools' approach to this. They were understanding of just how difficult this exercise was. But what they also said, and I think this is evidence of a sort of latent problem, is that they also identified tremendous gaps in the needs that their students have and identified things that just simply aren't being met. And we found that that gap was even more pronounced. That disparity was more pronounced amongst low-income parents of color who are predominantly in remote learning environments where that's their only option. They don't have the option to send their child to a physical school. And we also found tremendous economic hardships and trade-offs that those families were making, particularly, again, those families, low-income parents of color who were already starting this period from behind in many ways by economic, health, and a variety of other indicators. So we think, again, this means that there's more schools and the state and government can be doing to deal with our current circumstances, but also plan for how we recover, how we build back from this pandemic.
And if I'm correct, there's a short-term or a front burner perspective about this, but then there's also a more medium or longer term planning phase, or unpack that for me a little bit.
Yes.
How the timeline of addressing these might be considered.
Yes. So, I mean, as we speak, pretty much every large urban school district in the state of New Jersey has told families that they're going to continue in a remote learning environment through into the new calendar year. And if this winter and the COVID spike in cases is any indication, you'd expect that to probably persist longer into the winter, get us into spring, and mark a full year in many cases of remote learning. So in that kind of environment, what families are saying is right now, we need more support. Again, they've been forgiving towards their local schools, towards the government, and supportive of all the hard work people have put in this period. Bridge the gap during the midst of international crisis. But they're still saying we need more. We want a better remote learning product. We want to interact with teachers more. We want better information about how our children are actually academically progressing. We want higher quality internet service to facilitate this Zoom and video conference based learning. And so they identify a tremendous amount of things that are right now priorities. But what they also indicate is the disparities have a compounding nature. So if you were already starting from behind, you're falling further behind, which study after study is starting to substantiate. What that means is our strategy to come back from COVID, from this tremendous interruption in how we deliver public education, means we need a big, bold plan. We need I'm calling a Marshall Plan for rebuilding public education after this, where we're taking federal help, we're taking state help, and we're rethinking how we deliver public education once things start to go back to normal. And so I think the poll stands for both of those propositions. We need something short term now, their immediate needs, but there's also a compounding nature of the problem that's going to mean we need an even bigger response once schools get back to normal.
How fast can these changes be made, do you say?
A lot of this depends on state and federal government and how they work together. It's been a constant storyline is what the federal government is doing to help states, to help schools navigate the crisis. But we have a new commissioner of education in New Jersey. She's taken it as an imperative of hers to sort of address some of the inequality in how COVID has converted public schooling. And so I think what you need is a sort of plan that's starting now so that we're in a position to implement things come late spring, early summer, and start a new school year, hopefully in a world where we have mass vaccine deployment and it's safe to go back to school in something kind of sort of like what was normal before.
We can highlight disparities based on race, income, health, and these commingle, these connect and really reinforce each other, these disparities. Can you speak about that and how that's really not a binary consideration?
Two things. One is the health impacts of the pandemic have fallen disproportionately on low-income Black and Latino communities. Yeah. So you're more likely to die from COVID, you're more likely to be sort of subject to spread. And so that's been substantiated as a real specific challenge in the state of New Jersey as it is in other places. What we've also seen is that the recession that's followed the pandemic and the impacts of that are hitting hardest in these communities. Where we haven't spent enough time, in our view, is thinking about measuring, assessing what the educational impacts are, because that's something that has generational impact. If you don't learn to read by third grade, you are comparatively much worse off than a student who does. And so there are certain moments educationally you don't get back. And that's why we think it's important to be injecting data, research, and empirics into the conversation about the educational impact of COVID. That's what our foundation is really committed to, providing the public with more information about that so they can guide the sort of policy discussions about what we do, that Marshall Plan I talked about, what should be in it. We can't sort of prescribe a solution if we don't fully diagnose the nature, the scale of the problem.
Right. And all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, this survey, this poll is the first done during this fall of 2020 school period, correct?
That's right. And we felt like that was very important. So what school looked like this September after Labor Day, when everyone sent their kids back, is almost always look different than what parents were used to seeing in the spring. There's more video conference-based learning. Most schools took it upon themselves to figure this out, because even if they were hybrid, meaning their students went to school for part of the day or part of the week, they were still part of the day for most families that they were home and remote learning. And so, we found that it was important to check in with parents, to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling about various levels of decision-making regarding you and your children's school? And what more do you need for your child to be successful? And this is the first such check-in with New Jersey parents as a statewide sort of group this school year.
These are not just very important issues. These are the most important issues. And this poll is really informative. And I can't thank you enough for coming on Tap Into TV to talk to me about what it means and really looking at the path forward. Kyle Rosenkrans, Executive Director of the New Jersey Children's Foundation. Thank you. Take care, Kyle.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.